Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Shuffle Music Reviews and Retrospectives from a Gracelessly Aging Millennial. I'm Keaton, and we started out our first series here with top five album countdown, starting from 1986, the year I was born, up through present day. This week, the year, of course, is the year after I was born, volume two in this series, year 1987. So 1987, you're really in 80s hell. If you like a lot of what the 80s represented in music, you're going to love this year. If you're into the hair metal, if you're into the really sort of techie, synthy kind of sounds, this year is a smorgasbord of delights. If you're not, however, it's a challenging year, and I am definitely in the latter camp. Not really into the hair metal stuff. Def Leppard had Hysteria this year. Whitesnake had their self-titled album come out this year. It's just not my thing. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with you if it's yours, but just not something I relate to all that much. And then obviously you had a lot of big albums by big artists this year, almost all of which I found to be just highly overrated. So I really had to kind of dig deep and get quirky to sort of narrow down my top five from 1987. And I do have some honorable mentions, and we'll talk a little bit about the albums that I think were quite overrated that came out this year, because there were a lot of them by a lot of really big artists. One of those albums did sneak into my honorable mentions just because I felt like it's good enough to be there, and it's kind of impossible to do an 87 list without mentioning it. It really is a sort of elephant in the room kind of an album. But without further ado, let's get started with the top five albums of 1987. Like I said, I had to dig deep. I had to really go into uncharted territory to figure out a list that I really felt comfortable with, of stuff that I really liked a great deal. And so my first entry takes us all the way to South Africa, although not technically to South Africa, because Hugh Masekela, great jazz trumpet player, actually recorded this towards the tail end of his period in exile. He was exiled from South Africa from 1960 through 1990. This was, of course, approaching the end of the apartheid era, which means the album is very beautifully titled Tomorrow. And this one is really, really hard to find. You can find the album in its entirety on YouTube. It was uploaded, and it's apparently cool from a copyright standpoint because it's been there for many years and no one's touched it. And as a matter of fact, one of the top comments that appears under the video version of the album is from a guy named Don Freeman, who was a multi-instrumentalist who actually played on several of these tracks. Hugh Masekela, great jazz trumpeter. I had the privilege to see him live at Carnegie Hall in a tribute to the music of South Africa. That was back in 2014. I played the trumpet in junior high and in high school. I got pretty good at it, so I got kind of familiar with his music early on. You may recall his big song is called Grazing in the Grass, which you should look up. That's a great, great tune. A lot of the songs that he recorded in several different formats, both studio and live. There are a lot of different recordings of most of his bigger songs. The first one on this track is one of my favorites of his, called Bring Him Back Home, which is a tribute to Nelson Mandela. Great vocal melody intertwined with just an extremely catchy trumpet lick that repeats throughout the song. And there's some great soloing and great playing. You could find several different recordings of that song on the various different streaming services and on YouTube. This album has that sort of 80s tech gloss to it, like everyone seemed to put on their albums in the 80s, which I don't necessarily love, but his playing is so good and the songs have such a warmth to them that it kind of works. London Fog is another great track on this album, a great simple driving drum beat with rhythm guitar providing the sort of foundation for more great vocals and trumpet interplay. There's also a great lead guitar moment on that song as well. The second half of the album is kind of more minor key. Bird on a Wing is bluesier, but really just great trumpet playing on this album. It's a really fun, upbeat, sort of African jazz record that's in a desert of 80s hell really kind of stands out. And so I definitely recommend checking out this. I'll put a link in the description of this video to the actual album link on YouTube, because this is not available on Apple Music. It's not available on Spotify. It's one of those albums that you really have to seek out. I've known about this album for a while. Like I said, I kind of did deep dives on a lot of these great trumpet players back when I was learning the instrument, and so this just kind of stood out to me. I forgot it was 1987 until I looked at a big list of, okay, what were the good jazz albums that year? Because when I was looking over the list of pop and rock and alternative, I was like, oh man, this is slim pickings here. Let me see what was going on in the jazz world. And I saw, oh, this one, 1987. We'll listen to that one again. Then I go to find it, can't find it anywhere. So I did find a link to it on YouTube, and I will put it in the description of this video. Really, really cool album. Check it out. It's called Tomorrow by Hugh Masekela. That is my number 5. Okay, number 4 is probably equally obscure to a lot of people. But maybe to some fans of King Crimson, you're familiar with a band called the Bears. So the Bears were a band that formed in 1987. This was their debut album, but they were actually 11 years in the making. They formed from the members of a band called the Raisins, which was a Cincinnati-based band. Rob Fetters, Bob Neiswanger, and Chris Arducer. They met up with King Crimson guitarist Adrian Belew in 1976, and they kind of stayed in touch for a while, talking about working together until they finally released what would be their first album here in 1987. It's self-titled. It's called The Bears. It's a compact album. It's 10 songs, just a 33-minute runtime. A lot of poppy, catchy tunes here, with some great vocal melodies and great vocal harmonies, and of course, great guitar solos, both from Adrian Belew and Rob Fetters himself, who's no slouch on the instrument. But for those who are fans of King Crimson, you know what a unique player Adrian Belew is. And it is really kind of fun and cool to hear him play on poppier, more compact tunes. King Crimson is very proggy. Some of these songs run over 20 minutes long. So if you are kind of looking for some cool kind of avant-garde guitar playing, but you're intimidated by the prospect of listening to, 15, 20-minute tracks, as are not the norm on the King Crimson albums, but those tracks do tend to run longer. They're less accessible to the casual music listener. So this is a great kind of entree into Adrian Belew's guitar playing, which is really great. It's very original. He plays like no one else. And so this is an accessible sort of foray into his music. Lots of, like I said, just really catchy tunes here. None of the above. The opening track is great. Fear is Never Boring. Honeybee. Man Behind the Curtain. Superboy is a cool track toward the end. Figure It Out. Great album closer. Again, these songs are, I won't say they are, I won't say they bleed into each other. I won't say that they become indistinguishable from each other, but there's definitely a style and a vibe here that they don't stray too far from. But it's a really fun, entertaining album. Like I said, if you are not familiar with Adrian Belew's playing, I think you'll love it if you appreciate a great guitar player, which he certainly is. And if you are familiar with him, but you had never heard of this little side project, if you want to call it that, I think you will especially get a kick out of this one. So that's number 4, is The Bears, their self-titled 1987 album. Now, at number 3, I have an album that I just listened to again when I was putting together this list, because like I said, you're kind of going through the albums and you're thinking, okay, how do I get to a top 5 here? I had a bunch that were in contention for the number 5 slot, And then I saw this album and I'm like, oh, you know what? I remember liking that one quite a bit. Maybe that could be my number five. Maybe that could sneak on the back end of the list. And then I started listening to it and I'm like, you know what? I actually like this a lot more than I remember liking it at the time I first started listening to it. This is actually really good. This album actually really cranks. I think this is better than number five. And lo and behold, here it is at number three. And I'm talking about Among the Living by Anthrax. Like I said, I really forgot how much I liked this. I like, maybe it's now that I'm a little older, I really appreciate that this album does not take itself so seriously. That's something that I don't know. Maybe it bothered me a little bit at the time. You know, when you're young and you're listening to metal, metal can be very dark and brooding and, angsty in ways that really connect with you at the time. And then maybe it's because I'm a little older. I look back and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe not everything has to be a big opera, right? This is metal with more of a garage band kind of feel to it, more of a punk approach to the lyrics. And like I said, maybe it's just that I'm older and so I see it from a different point of view. But it is actually a nice contrast with a lot of the rest of the metal world, which can be very self serious. And a lot of that stuff can be great. I'm not knocking it. But this is kind of a breath of fresh air. It's a fun, upbeat metal album. I like the garage band style production and the sound. I like the punkier vocals. I think they work really well. I think it makes this a very fun and upbeat listen. And especially because none of what I just said detracts from how good the playing is on this. There's really great musicianship here. So it still delivers the goods as a great metal album. It's not just a big joke. You still get the high speed thrashing, you get the terrific rhythm section work by guitarist Scott Ian, drummer Charlie Benante, of course. The title track is great. I love that. It's a great album opener. You also have Caught in a Mosh was one of the big singles off of this. That's a really fun one. All of them are great. I Am the Law, NFL. I love Skeleton in the Closet. That is a really, really fun one. That is the fifth song on this album. And when I got to that, I'm like, you know what? This is not a number five pick. This is actually a little higher up on the list. That's just a super, super fun song. And then Indians, which was one of the other singles off of this, that's a really, really fun tune as well. A very politically charged song about the mistreatment of Native American Indians, of course. But I love how they have the sort of tomahawk chop riff at the beginning and then it reprises at the end. And some great fun stuff in between. And then one other key track on this is ADI, The Horror of It All. That's an 8-minute sort of more proggy track. My only quip with that one is it kind of stops more than it ends. It just kind of takes you on this 8-minute journey, and then there's just a pretty abrupt fade out at the very end. So it could have used some more resolution there, but that's a little nitpicky. Overall, this is a really, really fun listen. If you heard this a while ago and you forgot about it, I encourage you to go back and give it another listen. If you're intimidated by heavy metal, if you think it's too severe for you, this is also a good sort of entree into the genre because it is not as dire and heavy from a mood perspective as a lot in the genre. So I really enjoy this one quite a bit. Anthrax, Among the Living. This is widely regarded as one of their best albums, if not their best album. This is certainly a classic for Anthrax fans. So I definitely recommend checking that out. That is my number three. All right. My number two is from a band that I absolutely adore. They are one of my top five favorite bands, no doubt. And I was very, very pleased to when I was going back and looking through the lists of albums to consider for this top five. I was very pleased that this album was made in 1987 because I knew it was made around 87, but I wasn't sure this was the year. And this is not on any of the reference lists that you go for just to get an idea of what you're doing because this, like a lot of their albums, very, very underappreciated by the critics. I'm talking, of course, about Jethro Tull, and the name of this album is Crest of a Knave. at number 2. This is probably their most underrated album as a band ever. Not to be confused with their best. It's by no means even close to their best album. But this is often dismissed as just latter year slop, and it's really not. It's really quite good. Metal fans, speaking of the heavy metal genre, know this album as the album that beat Metallica for the first ever metal slash hard rock performance at the Grammy Awards. It was at the 1989 Grammys. It beat out And Justice for All by Metallica, which was a 1988 release. The Grammy calendar is a little bit weird. It goes, in fact, I should learn, actually, if I'm going to do a music show, I should learn what the exact calendar is. But it's not just from January to December. It actually extends a little bit before that. So a 1987 album released in the tail end of the year would qualify for the 89 Grammys. And so this beat out Metallica's And Justice for All. It also beat out the debut album from Jane's Addiction called Nothing Shocking. That was a big favorite amongst the critics. The critics really liked that album. And this beat out both of them. It's one of the most notorious Grammy upsets ever. So much so that the record label, Chrysalis, created an ad campaign for this album after the Grammys, jokingly describing the flute, which, of course, for those who don't know Jethro Tull, they're famous for Ian Anderson's flute playing, as a heavy, metal instrument, because they knew it was kind of ridiculous that this was put in the same category as a Metallica album. So, genre fans will, of course, object to that Grammy win because it really isn't a hard rock or a metal album, but it is, I think, a really, really good album. And like I said, perhaps the most underrated in Jethro Tull's entire catalog. They put out so much. I don't know if I'm married to that statement, but it's definitely up there. And I think part of why this got lumped into the hard rock metal genre is because of the work of Martin Barre, who was Jethro Tull's lead guitarist, who's maybe the most underrated guitarist in classic rock history. He is an amazing player, and he is not a household name the way Clapton and Hendrix and those guys are. But he is terrific both as a rhythm guitarist and as a soloist, and he really shines on this album. From the first track, he makes as majestic an entrance as you could ever think of in the opener Steel Monkey, which is a great song off of this, a great opener. He also has really great playing throughout the album, as does Ian Anderson. I mean, these guys are consummate musicians. They're really terrific players. And so it's no surprise that, all the playing on all of these songs are great. But if you go through them, Farm on the Freeway, track 2, terrific, just main verse and vocal, and also just a great building jam on that song. That's a great track. 6.5 minutes, nice meaty song there. Jumpstart is number 3. Now, a song like Jumpstart is a perfect example of why I love Jethro Tull, because Jumpstart, from a songwriting standpoint, is perfectly mundane. There's nothing remarkable about it. But they're such great players and such interesting musicians that they can even make what would, on 9 out of 10 artist albums, be a throwaway song, a filler song. They make it interesting and worth listening to. The guitar chords are so interesting and so quirky and so cool, and they're performed in such that on this track you can really hear every note of them. There's also this great little section in Jumpstart where the flute and the guitar are soloing at the exact same time, playing the exact same notes. Obviously, a very intricate sort of studio creation, and then they diverge and start playing different things, and then it kind of comes back to the song. Again, not a remarkable song, not a great song, not a particularly memorable song, but when a band is as talented as Jethro Tull, they can make songs like that fun to the point where it's not a skip if you're listening straight through. It's worth listening to. She Said She Was a Dancer, track 4. That's a kind of one of the singles off of this album. That's actually one of the least interesting tracks on here. Budapest, a 10-minute epic, great tune. Mountain Men, I love Mountain Men. Mountain Men is a great guitar performance, just from beginning to end. This album was probably Jethro Tull's most guitar forward album since their sort of prog classic Minstrel in the Gallery in 1975. That's one of their best albums. This is nowhere near that level. But there is a lot to recommend this. And like I said, in a year that I find kind of thin, just because a lot of the albums that I'm supposed to love in 87 are albums that I did not love at all. This makes it all the way up to the number 2 spot, Jethro Tull's Crest of a Knave. So, up until now, this list has kind of been an island of misfit albums. It's just one of those years where, like I said, so many of the major artists put out stuff that's so well regarded by, I guess, everyone but me. And so these were all kind of quirky, deep cut kind of picks so far. But my number one was my number one going in, and it survived the various rounds of research that I did when putting this together. The number one pick is something that is widely regarded as one of the best 10 records of 1987, and that is, of course, Document by R.E.M. Now, before I talk about Document, I want to go back to the 1986 list for a moment, because one of the albums that was absent from that list, conspicuously absent in the minds of some of the people I was reading the comments, and I figured this feedback would come, was, of course, R.E.M.'s Life's Rich Pageant that came out in 1986. And Life's Rich Pageant was a very important album for R.E.M. It was in Life's Rich Pageant that they kind of turned the corner from that sort of college jangly rock sound to something darker, more severe, and more serious, heavier, if you will. That kind of sound really defined them from Life's Rich Pageant on out. And that sound really served the band very, very well over the course of their career, especially as Michael Stipe's voice got raspier and smokier and rougher. The sort of lower register, I won't say grungier and grimier, but darker, more serious sound really complemented them a great deal. And really, I think, really suited them very well, especially as the years and decades went on. The thing about Life's Rich Pageant, though, is I just don't think the set of songs was as strong as Document or even several of the albums that came after Document. I think Life's Rich Pageant was R.E.M. kind of turning the corner, making that pivot, and Document is where they really land on their feet and really get super comfortable in what would be their new sound that would carry them through the rest of their career. There is a confidence about this one, there is a self-assuredness about this one, and the songwriting really reflects that. And nothing demonstrates what I'm talking about better than track one, Finest Work Song, where it starts out, there's that offbeat drum hit, and then boom, lands right on the one, and it's just a one chord dirge of a verse with a great vocal on top of it, soaring chorus. That is a great track one, side one for a band that's now finally made a statement and arrived at its new sound. Finest Work Song, great opening track. Welcome to the Occupation, another really cool song about government involvement in Latin America. This is probably R.E.M.'s most political album they've ever done. Exhuming McCarthy, that's classic R.E.M. The sort of wittiness and the irony of a sort of tribute, quote unquote, to Joseph McCarthy, done in this very sort of like 60s jingly kind of tune. Really great. Disturbance at the Heron House, another just song that only Michael Stipe could write. They have such a distinct style, and so much of that is on display on this album. Strange is track 5. That's actually one of the only tracks I'm not particularly fond of. And then, of course, you have the two big songs off of this album, both of which are very, very different from each other in just about every way they could be. It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine. Everybody knows that one. Vocal wizardry on display, just lyric after lyric after lyric, sung at breakneck speed with precision and wit and humor. What a great tune. That ironically has more of the older R.E.M. sound to it than the rest of the album. but still an undeniably great song. Just the vocal performance alone makes it a classic. And then you have the one I love, which, like I said, just about the opposite of It's the End of the World as we know it. The one I love has very, very few lyrics, just repeated over and over again, simply but beautifully. That's Michael Stipe really getting into that lower register, that really sort of growly, raspy voice that he would become known for. Really pretty song, really great tune. Fireplace, again, lower register, growly, raspy vocal. But it in Fireplace, we actually get a nice surprise. One of the very rare occasions where REM brought in outside studio musicians. We get this really terrific sax solo and jam on that song that just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's not a long track, it's just 3 minutes and change. But that saxophone solo is pretty ripping. I really like that track a lot. Lightning Hopkins is decent. That's one of the more forgettable tracks, in my opinion. But then the last two on here, King of Birds, again, that is just REM getting super comfortable in this new sound. A really pretty, slow paced song with, again, not to repeat myself, that's Michael Stipe really getting comfortable in this new vocal range that would really become not a trademark, but it would become something that we instantly identified him with. Whenever we hear an REM song, as soon as he opens his mouth, we know that's him. We know that's REM. And again, this marked, I would say, not the beginning of a new era, but this was them getting really comfortable in what their new era would be. And then Oddfellows Local 151, sounds like a labor union, but in this case, it's a really, really dark and eerie song about basically a bunch of drunk homeless guys who used to convene behind an old firehouse that Michael Stipe lived near and would see and observe often. The lyrics in that are just really bleak. But in a very, very eerie kind of way. It's a great album closer. Don't forget this album came out. I mean, we're talking about 1987, right? We're talking about the end of Reagan's second term, heading into George H.W. Bush's first term. This was an era really defined by materialism and material excess. And on this, REM's most political record, to end the album with this very evocative sort of poem, just really this voyeuristic view into a world of desperation and depravity, is just a really, really chilling way to end this. Oddfellows Local 151, Behind the Firehouse, where Pee Wee sits upon the wall to preach. This boy and girl that gather pearls of wisdom falling from his mouth, wash off the blood, wash off the 151. The pearls of wisdom falling from his mouth are his teeth. Homeless guy getting drunk, ranting, his teeth falling out of his mouth, bloodied up, which implies that there's some fighting going on. And the 151 refers to the proof of the rum that they all get drunk off of. So that is a really eerie tune. It's a great song, great way to end what is a terrific landmark album. Like I said, if Life's Rich Pageant was them turning the corner, this is them landing on their feet and running. And it's just, song for song, beat for beat, the strongest album of 1987. Feel pretty confident in that. All right, so now we're going to go to some runners up. Like I said, I usually do a top five, and then I will also do, in addition to a top five albums, I will do some runners up, some albums that did not quite make the list, but that I think are still noteworthy. Okay. So one of them is an album that you probably have not heard of, but this is called Daddy's Highway by a New Zealand band called the Bats. Just really jangly acoustic folk pop tunes, really fun, really melodic. No masterpieces on this album, but like I said, in a year really defined by a lot of mainstream acts getting a lot of high praise for albums that I don't think are worthy of high praise. It's nice to be able to highlight something that you probably haven't heard of, so go check out the Bats. Daddy's Highway. Not strong enough for the list, but strong enough for a listen, for sure. Lyle Lovett, Pontiac, is another runner-up. This was his second album. His debut came out the year before, it was a self-titled album in 1986. His first album was straightforward country tunes, pretty good. I don't think Lyle Lovett's put out a bad album. Great songwriter, great player, great singer. The first album was pretty straightforward country. The first half of this album is kind of straightforward country. If I Had a Boat, the big single off of this, great country tune. Nothing wrong with that at all. But in the second half of this, he kind of starts exploring more of the blues and soul kind of sound that would really set him apart from the rest of the country world as his career went on. Joshua Judge's Ruth was kind of the peak of that. That might even be on my list for its year. I think that's 92, which is a strong year, so it might not make it. That might be a runner-up again, but we'll see. Haven't thought that far in advance yet. But Pontiac, definitely a big album for him. Great sophomore effort where he kind of starts out in the comfort zone that really defined his first album, and then you can kind of see him branching off into some more American roots genre work, which he became famous for as his career went on. So Pontiac by Lyle Lovett, a runner-up. This one by Rush is kind of an interesting album. Hold Your Fire. This is, definitely an 80s sound on this album. This is definitely an 80s Rush album. Like I said, it seems like no band could resist the toys that made the 80s sound what it was. This is definitely a little glossy for my taste, right? The production screams 1987 for sure. It's not a transcendent album in this way. But they, just like Jethro Tull, are a band that's so talented that they can make it work. I do really like the song Time Stands Still off of this album, which has a great vocal cameo from Amy Mann, who is a great songwriter in her own right. She will certainly appear on one of my 90s lists, maybe more. But Time Stands Still is a great tune. And like I said, this is one of those albums where it doesn't have a lot of the song highlights that an album like Crest of a Knave had. But this is an example of a band who's just so damn good that they can get away with a lot of the 80s fuckery that a lot of other bands cannot, in my opinion. This one here, the Joshua Tree, this is my final runner-up by U2. This is widely considered the masterpiece, the crown jewel of 1987. And in fairness, I do have to put it on here. I'm not just ranking it so low because Bono is a douchebag. I can separate the art from the artists. There are a lot of douchey artists who I will give their due as this show goes on. Tom York has exposed himself to be quite a douchey guy himself. I can still give it up. Radiohead has put out some phenomenal music. Not all of their stuff is amazing. I'm not like a Radiohead freak the way a lot of people are, but they have put out some great stuff, and so has U2. U2 has put out some great stuff, and this album is a good album. I'm not saying this is not a good album. It's one of my runners up because it sounds so good. The thing about this album is it's produced so well. You have Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno producing this. They also produced their previous album, The Unforgettable Fire, and this album just sounds terrific. The Streets Have No Name, that great sort of anthemic build. There's also obviously the big singles off this album are that one, The Streets Have No Name, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, With or Without You. To me, if you love those second and third tracks, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For and With or Without You, if you love those songs, you love this album. If you don't love those songs, you don't love this album. I'm not a huge fan of either of those two songs. I'm just not. They just don't hit me. They just don't hit me. If they hit you, that's great. You probably think this is a masterpiece. To me, U2 has done much better work than those. In fact, I actually think this is part of why I have this as a runner up. And you talk about a hot take. The album that they put out the following year, Rattle and Hum, I don't know if it's going to make my list for 88, but that's a combination live album, cover album with a lot of studio songs on it as well. And I think that the three studio songs, the three big singles off of that album, which are Desire, Angel of Harlem, and All I Want Is You, I think all those singles are stronger than these first three songs. And I understand not many people feel that way. That is those other three songs have kind of a different sound to them, although All I Want Is You really sounds like it could have been off the Joshua Tree. But certainly Desire and Angel of Harlem are more in the sort of soul gospel blues world than a lot of this stuff. But I think they have put out stronger singles, and I think U2 is a band, but let's face it, they're not a deep cut band. U2 is a band that's all about the hits. Bono is a singer who is good at loud, bombastic, operatic, melodramatic, anthemic rock songs. And to me, this album, the production is more atmospheric. I don't think Bono is an interesting enough songwriter to make this album a masterpiece. It's good. It's fine. There's good stuff. I thought like Where the Streets Have No Name is good. It's a great opener. Those two songs still haven't found what I'm looking for with or without you. They're good songs. Nothing wrong with those songs. I just don't think they're masterpiece songs. Bullet the Blue Sky, track 4. That's my favorite song off of the album. I think that works really well. That works really well. I love the drum sound on that. I think Bono's vocal on that really works. Track 5, Running to Stand Still. That song to me is a perfect example of why this album is just not a masterpiece. It's just not the great seminal piece of work that so many people regard it as. Running to Stand Still, the piano on that is beautiful. The production on the piano sound is beautiful. I like a lot of the subtle guitar work on that track as well. To me, Bono's lyrics and vocals just don't add enough to it. It's just not a compelling enough song to be a great song. You know, you give that kind of production work to an artist like Bob Dylan, you'll get a profound song out of that. Bono just does not, to me, he's not an interesting enough songwriter to really carry a tune that's that sort of ethereal. It doesn't work tremendously well for me. It's not a terrible song. Like I said, it's a great sounding song, and this album is a great sounding album. I like In God's Country, pretty good. I think One Tree Hill is good. So like I said, not a bad album. In a year, in a particularly weak year, it's definitely worth mentioning. But I do think this is one of the more overrated albums of the year and of the decade. And then there's stuff that I'm really not mentioning on here too, which are, you know, major releases by major artists, which I find just to be entirely overrated. Bruce Springsteen's Tunnel of Love. Never really cared about that album at all. Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation. Ragdoll. Who cares? Dude looks like a lady. Who cares? I like those songs when I was 13. Haven't thought about them since. This is kind of polarizing, but was never a huge Guns N' Roses fan. Appetite for Destruction came out this year. I like Welcome to the Jungle. The other two singles off of that album are and Less Than Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City, not even Really not a fan of that song at all. So that was a huge album, 1987. But not for me. So yeah, there's a lot this year that got a lot of praise that was just not available to me on the list. So that's why I had to really kind of dig deep. I say, okay, all these albums that I'm supposed to love, I don't really love. So I got to go find some other stuff that I liked a lot. Like I said, one of the weaker years, 1986, The Smiths, Queen is Dead. That would probably beat any album on this list. Maybe not Document. Maybe not Document, but it would be at least number 2 on this list, if not number 1. So this was definitely a weaker year than 86, but still some really fun stuff, still some really cool stuff that I hope you find yourself and explore a little bit. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you liked this 1987 countdown. Once again, just to go from 5 to 1, Hugh Masekela's Tomorrow at number 5, The Bears' self-titled CD at number 4, Anthrax, Among the Living at number 3, Jethro Tull's Crest of a Knave at number 2, and number 1, Document by R.E.M. Thanks everybody very much for watching. We'll see you next time.